This is Dan Schneider. On this Dan Schneider video interview, I'll be talking with Eric Schaefer, a pastor in the Lutheran Church, about Davey and Goliath. Last week I did a show with a fellow named Tim Frakes about the old Davey and Goliath TV show from the 1960s and 70s. Tim suggested I speak with Eric Schaefer, a pastor in the Lutheran Church, for a bit more depth about the show. So Eric Schaefer is here. So welcome, Eric. I like to give my guests a few minutes to give a background about themselves. So if you could.
Sure. Dan, thanks for having me. I am Pastor Eric Schaefer. I am a pastor of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. And from 1992 to 2006, I was the director for communication for the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, working out of their national office in Chicago. And Tim Frakes was on my staff. I hired him to do the work that he did, and Davey, the project was one of them. And I've served congregations across the country in Pennsylvania, New York, Massachusetts, Chicago, California, and now I'm retired in California, although I flunked retirement and I went back to work for Global Refuge, which is the Lutheran Refugee Agency. Having some tough times these days, but persevering. So that's quick background on me. And because I was head of communication for the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, that meant that Davey and Goliath, the stop motion animation series from the 1960s, was under my care. And while I was the communications director, we launched a website for Davey and Goliath with complete information about its history. We launched a whole bunch of projects. There was the big project was a 2004 Christmas special, but we also did 2 seasons of Vacation Bible School with Davey. We did some short spots for disaster relief and evangelism using Davey. And I even let Mountain Dew use the Davey images for a commercial, and we can talk about that a little more. But it was a fun project. I had really wonderful people working with me on the resurrection of Davey and Goliath. Christy Bangert headed up, and Ava Martin was the main person working with the animators, and there were so many others on the team that did it. But that's my background. I do know a lot about the history. I had a chance to meet some of the founders before they died, and I have met Art Clokey and his son Joe, who unfortunately passed a few years ago. I knew J. Marshall Strauss, who was on the team. I had conversations with the key person on the team for writing the scripts, Richard Dick Sutcliffe. I never met Frank Kloss, was the other person on the team, but I did know his widow, talked to her about it. So I have some knowledge about the whole series too, obviously from that. And having worked to resurrect it, I had to learn the background. So if you want to review the background, we can certainly start with that if you'd like.
Well, let me just, before we get started, I was raised as a Lutheran, and you mentioned going around the country. I went to St. John's Evangelical Lutheran Church as a boy and also to their school for a few years. Did you ever know a family named Stagey, Martin Stagey? He was the pastor, and his son became a pastor as well. Steege Stagey.
Ted Stagey was a pastor. That's
He might have been the son.
I'm sure. I know him briefly, and I know his spouse.
Okay. I just wondered how big or small the Lutheran.
It's a small. The Lutheran world is big and small, and I'm always running into people, and especially Dan, since I had such a public position, I go around the country and people know who I am. I have no idea who they are, but that's okay, and it's nice to see people who know who you are. So, but. Yeah. So as you've heard from Tim, in 1958, the Reverend Dr. Franklin Clark Fry, very famous president, that's what they called the bishop at that time of the United Lutheran Church in America, proposed that the church spend some surplus money on children's television. And in 1959, at the end of the year, the United Lutheran Church in America put aside $1 million to do children's television. Now, what would that be today? I think I looked it up the other day. It's at least $5 million today. So that was serious money. And then they looked around and they said, well, who can we get? And they heard about this young couple who were doing a series called Gumby and Pokey. And that, of course, was Art and Ruth Clokey. And they hired them to be the animators. Art and Ruth Clokey were seminary grads, although they were not, they were not into traditional Christianity later in their lives. They did both go to seminary. So they knew something about theology and the background.
I heard about that they weren't Lutherans. What religion were they?
I don't know what religion they were. It may have been unidentified. Okay. You can go to seminary without, certain seminaries. And then they assembled this team of young men. It wasn't all men, but it was generally men who were extremely creative and as you know, because you like the series and have studied it, extremely edgy for the time. Mm-hmm. And so now in that time period, between 59 and 62, the United Lutheran Church in America merged into the Lutheran Church in America, and that was the main body that then worked on the 60 episodes, 15-minute episodes, and the 5 half-hour specials that were produced in the 60s and early 1970s. And so the Davey and Goliath was a stop-motion animation, and we always have to make that clear. It wasn't claymation. These are called puppets, and they were made with styrofoam. And there's a very sad story about what happened to the original puppets. They got thrown in the trash when they ended the series. But there is one set of them in the archives of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America in Chicago, although they weren't used in the original series. They were extras to the original series. There is one set remaining from the original series, and all the puppets from our resurrected time are also in the archives.
Well, let me just ask, before we move on, let me just ask a couple of questions, and one that I didn't get to ask Tim. So David and Goliath, the story of the boy with the slingshot who later becomes the king, he kills Goliath. It seems odd. Why was that chosen over, say, Daniel and the Lion's Den, or Samson and Delilah as the names, as the boy and his female dog or something? Why David and Goliath? Because that brings up this image of, conquest, and yet it's about a suburban boy and his dog.
Yeah, I think they picked it just for fun. It was a play on words, and the little bit I know of those guys, and they would play. It was a play on words, and of course, as you know, it had nothing to do. Well, it had to do with a little boy that got in trouble, and Goliath was his conscience, and Mom and Dad saved the day. That was the theme of every episode.
Yeah, and so is Goliath. Goliath is can only be heard by Davey in most of the episodes. In a few episodes, he's able to talk with other animals, like a deer or a bird or something, and some of the other dogs that appear in the episodes. Is Goliath supposedly just a projection of Davey, if we're getting psychological?
I think so. I didn't interview the guys about that, but that seems that makes sense, that he's Davey's conscience.
And when we talk about the puppets, there were 3 seasons worth shot in the early 60s. Then there's a 5 or 6 year hiatus. We got the 2 later series in the 70s. And it seems that the puppets used in the first year or 2 especially, they were working the kinks out, because you can see the movements are kind of jaggedy and whatnot. And Davey seems significantly younger. I would say Davey seems about 8 years old. His sister maybe 6. When we get to the 70s, though, Davey looks more like a preteen, 11, 12, 13.
That sounds about right, but I don't know that background, and it just may be that when they revisited them, they made them differently. Interesting tidbit: I have met Sally Simmel is still alive, and actually she lives in the community where I live, and she was the young assistant to these guys, and they named Sally after her. Mm-hmm. And so So she was involved in the very beginning a little bit. The episodes were shown on national TV. This was the time when there was a requirement for the traditional broadcasters to show religious programming. They had to show, I think it was 3 hours a week or a month. That requirement is no longer in place. And it was mostly NBC that showed them, often on a Saturday morning, but other times, including Sunday morning too. And when I was working on bringing it back with the team, I heard, and you won't be surprised by this because you're of that generation too, Dan, I heard from so many baby boomers who Davey and Goliath was, some of the notes were very sad. Davey and Goliath was my only family. Davey and Goliath was, and I heard from Christians, Jews, and non-believers about that. Because as you know, it was a show produced by the Lutheran Church, but you wouldn't really know it. Yes, there was a souped up Mighty Fortress is Our God as the theme song. And yes, Davey went to church and there was a pastor, but it was never identified as a Lutheran church. And that was purposeful, to have the widest audience possible for what were basically moral messages, goodness messages, inclusive messages. As you know from studying it, I don't remember all of what Tim shared with you. It's still studied in film school, partly because it was so, groundbreaking. The first character on national television who was black.
Yeah.
And I believe the first character on national television who was Latino. And so those are significant. In 1962, you didn't see black kids or black adults on TV, and of course, those kids were kids. They weren't stereotypes. They weren't played to be funny. They were Davey's friends. And that was just the way it was. And then, of course, they dealt with all kinds of topics. They dealt with, the famous Easter episode where Grandma dies is one that's still very powerful for people today. And then, of course, there's the polka dot tie episode and the story behind it. The animators decided to do a story about racism, and they called it polka dot tie. And initially, NBC wouldn't run it. It was controversial for them. And I believe they finally did. But that's the kind of, groundbreaking stuff they were doing, these guys. And they could do it through animation when they couldn't do it through other ways. So that was exciting. It has a cultural relevance still today, although people are forgetting it. But it's still shown, it's in reruns on Trinity Broadcasting. I'm not sure with permission. We used to try to control it as far as who used it, but there's so much of it. There's so much of it on YouTube now that it's out there still. So then, if I can move to the relaunch, if you don't mind, we had long wanted to relaunch Davey, and we finally got strong support from our presiding bishop, H. George Anderson, in the late 1990s. And so in the early 2000s, we started to work on the next generation of Davey and Goliath. And we focused on a Christmas special that was released in 2004, Davey and Goliath's Snowboard Christmas. You can find it on YouTube. And in this special, in 2004 Christmas, Hanukkah, Ramadan, and Christmas were all about the same time. Now, of course, Hanukkah and Christmas are often the same time, but there was the Ramadan time. And so we introduced a Muslim family and a Jewish family and consulted with Muslim and Jewish scholars to do that. And then we introduced snowboarding, which was new and big at that time. And it's a sweet 45 minutes, a special. I showed it here in our community last year, and adults loved it, as children do. And unfortunately, it never got picked up beyond the Hallmark Channel. We almost got it what was ABC Family Channel, but it didn't get picked up.
And why was that? Was that because people thought you were trying to just promote the Lutheran point of view? Did they not actually watch the material?
Well, I think that's the answer, of course. They didn't watch the thing, but I don't know. Because as you know, there certainly are a lot of animated specials that have Christmas involved in it. So I don't know the answer to that. I wish it was different. Now, as we were working on the project to raise the money and reintroduce Davey, out of the blue, I got a phone call at my office from BBDO, the big advertising company in New York City, and they were about to do a series of commercials for Mountain Dew, a nostalgic series. And they were going to take characters from the 50s and 60s and 70s, cartoon characters, and use them. They were going to do Spy versus Spy, remember that?
Yeah.
And they were going to do a couple like that. And they said, we'd like to use Davey and Goliath. And we'd like to pay you to use it. We can't guarantee it'll be used, and you will have approval over the content. So they said, how much do you want? Well, here I am. I'm not an advertising exec. So I said, can I call you right back? So I hung up the phone and I went up to the lawyer. Phil Harris, the Yale State's lawyer, was a key player helping us with this project. And I said to Phil, well, what should we ask for? We both agreed that we'd ask for $150,000. And that was going to be paid the next day without strings, if they used it or not, whether we approved it or not. So I called them back and I said, we would charge $150,000. And they said, okay, check's on the way. So, right away I said, Dan, should have asked for more. But so then they did a commercial for Mountain Dew, and you can find that online, Davey and Goliath Mountain Dew. And it's a very interesting, it was animated by an animator named Mark Bannon. And it's a traditional Davey story in the sense that Davey and I think it's Tommy are having an argument over a can of Mountain Dew. Dad comes in and says, what's going on? So but the twist is in the commercial is that Davey and Tommy are having this argument over Mountain Dew. Goliath's there too. Dad comes in and says, what's the problem, boys? And then Dad drinks the Mountain Dew. So there's a twist of Mountain Dew that they put to it. And and it ends with what just happened, Davey says, and Goliath says, we've been hosed, Davey, we've been hosed. Okay, they wanted to use we've been boned, and we said no. We didn't want them to use we've been boned, but we let them use we've been hosed. Okay, the commercial came out, and it attracted a lot of new attention for Davey and Goliath. Now, as you might imagine, it also attracted people who were really angry with me for allowing a commercial company to use Davey and Goliath. It was commercialism. It was a sugary drink. And I had one particular synod bishop, who was very angry. But when we went to the youth gathering in 2003, and we had the large character figures. At that point we made character figures that you wore to represent Davey and Goliath, like Disney characters. The kids knew it, and it was because of that commercial. So that was one of the ways we raised money for this project to bring Davey back. Another way was, for the first time, we had product. When they introduced Davey in the 50s and 60s and 70s, they never had any ancillary product. And so we introduced plush toys, bobbleheads, pins. We had all kinds of product that was licensed through our licensor, and that helped raise money to put on the Snowboard Christmas. Snowboard Christmas cost us a little less than $1 million to produce. We also did two years of Bible school using the Davey characters, as I mentioned. And there were a lot of other things that we did with the characters too. So it was a very fun project. I've always said I met the best and worst people in Hollywood in this project, because there were people that were very interested in it. We got lied to, not by Hollywood people. That was a whole other matter. But mostly people were very supportive and wanted to help us do this. And, so it was on Hallmark for several Christmases, and, but ever got the traction. And then then another presiding bishop was elected who hadn't grown up on Davey. So we kind of never got beyond those times, which is unfortunate. And the Davey and Goliath website was taken down and has never been brought back, the official website, which is really unfortunate too. See, what else did I want to mention to you? So I want to hold up while we're talking about the first history. The key players in getting Davey and Goliath started in the early 60s, besides Ruth and Art Clokey, were Dick Sutcliffe, Marshall Strauss, and Frank Close, K-L-O-S. And I knew Marshall Strauss pretty well. I met Dick. Frank had died by the time we were involved, but I met his widow, and we honored them with the Wittenberg Award in, I think it was 2004, and honored the founders of Davey and Goliath, and Art and Marshall and Dick were still alive enough to receive it. They were such creative people when you think about it at the time.
So I wanted to ask you about something that I did mention to Tim. I had grown up, I was born in 65, so one of the shows I grew up with as a kid outside of Davey and Goliath was the Brady Bunch. And people have always had some similar criticisms of the Brady Bunch as they did Davey and Goliath, as being square, as being too moralistic or whatnot. But I think that's one of the reasons that the Brady Bunch has outlasted a lot of the sort of family 70s shows, is that I've always thought it's sort of like a modern Aesopian fable in each of those episodes. And certainly the same thing is true with Davey and Goliath, although it's a bit more overtly religious and spiritual than the Brady Bunch was. But I wanted to talk about a few of some of the original episodes. And one of the differences between the 1970s 2 years and the 3 years originally in the 60s, other than technically the puppets getting better and being less herky-jerky in their movements, is that in the 1960s it seems that most of the shows were centered on the inner world of Davey. Davey experiencing things as they came into his world, whereas the 1970s stuff, it's sort of Davey looking out into the world more, about other people, about more overtly political or religious or things having to do with people being ill or being poor or suffering in some way. Can you speak? I know you weren't there, but can you speak on the difference between the 60s and the 70s shows' approaches? Because there seems to be quite a divergence.
It would only be a guess, and they'd probably be the same guess you would have, Dan, is that think of the difference between 62 and 68.
Yeah.
And I think that was really, I think they were reflecting the times, the civil rights movement, the youth movement, the changes in social praise, and I think they reflected the times and trying to put the positive spin on those things that were happening in society. Yeah, I think that would be the best, because it was the same key writers involved, I believe, in the later series, I think the continued attraction of Davey and Goliath is partly because Davey's a real boy in the sense that he gets in trouble. Mm-hmm. He often gets in trouble, and he's not perfect, right? Even in the Snowboard special, Christmas special, which I don't know if you've watched, Davey gets in trouble. His hard-headedness, he always learns a lesson or two. And I think that may be the continued appeal some of them aren't simplistic lessons. They're children's lessons. Yeah. But the writers didn't look down on children. They believed in children.
Well, Davy does in a number of episodes come across as a self-centered and bratty boy. He
And
calls his
that was
yeah
purposeful,
yeah
so that there could be a moral and a change.
yeah.
That was
He'll
purposeful.
call
You're
his
right.
sister a name. There was one episode from the second season called "The Stop Clock," which is interesting because Davy basically is he's angry at his parents, he's angry at Goliath, he's angry at his sister, he's angry at his friends for perceived slights, and then he takes a nap or something, and he has this dream where he's the only person left in the world, and it's eerie because it's very similar to sort of like end of the world scenarios from movies from the 50s and 60s, and this is 1962, right in that era. I don't know if you ever saw, there was a great sci-fi or rather horror B film called Carnival of Souls from that era. I'd look it up. It's interesting because Davy, there's no sound. There's just a little bit of background music, and he learns to appreciate things by not having them. And there are other episodes too, but the, that episode is one of a handful too where supernatural kind of things happen. In one episode, Davy and his sister think they're going to be at a rocket launch and to go into outer space. So you get the sense that children's imaginations play a big part in it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And maybe we could call it the Twilight Zone era of Davey and
Yeah.
Goliath. That sort of thing. But yeah, I mean, it is fascinating how it did reflect the changes of the times. There's no question about that. As is when you think about our 2004 work, by being more interfaith, that spoke to the times too, for sure. I did want to tell you a little bit. One of the fun things about the resurrection of Davey and Goliath was, so Art and Joe come to see me in Chicago to talk about the program. And they say, we want to bring our lawyer along, and we think he should be your entertainment lawyer in Hollywood for this project. And I said, okay, what's his name? Bela Lugosi Jr. So we had Dracula's son as our lawyer.
That's good.
And he looks like his dad. He's still alive, I believe. He looks like his dad. He was the nicest guy, and he was a good attorney for entertainment work. And he reviewed all the contracts for, with the products and things like that, and helped us with that. Yeah, that was just, there were just so many fun stories from the second time around,
Oh, your sound just went out.
okay.
Oh, no, now it
No.
just came.
Yeah, there was a TV special from those times on broadcast TV about the founding of Davey and Goliath, and we just did a whole bunch of things that were, I wish we could have gotten it back to production, but we did some wonderful things and reached some children with a good message, so it was very satisfying.
Let me just ask about some of the other characters that Davy interacted with, and what you may have heard from the originators as to their purpose in the show. We talked about Goliath being possibly Davy's conscience or whatnot. His sister, she's the younger sister. She's not the older sister, and he's only one other sibling. Sally, oftentimes. Is the damsel in distress. There's probably a handful of episodes where Davy has to rescue her from, one time she gets stuck on the side of a river and she can't get away. There's one time when they go to an island and I think she gets lost. What import or what purpose do you think that the character Sally served in the series towards Davy?
I think, and I think you may be more of an expert than me on this, but I think that Sally was a character of the times. You had these 4 white men writing the series, and I think she reflected the role of women. I think Sally is probably the character that doesn't project the liberalness of the times. So she becomes a foil, doesn't she? She has to be rescued, those kind of things. And she's very two-dimensional in some ways. You get more depth with Davey and Goliath, and even Mom and Dad, the Hansons. Yeah, I think she's more of unfortunately a character of the times and maybe the earlier times.
And let's talk about the parents, because they're Elaine and John Hanson, and they probably are. They reminded my wife has been rewatching old Leave It to Beaver episodes, and they kind of somewhere midway between the Beaver Cleaver clan with the mother wearing pearls as she's dusting the furniture, and say the Brady Bunch, Carol Brady's character. The parents are somewhere in the mid 60s there. Was there a reason that that was chosen? Do you know? And the name just Hanson is very Nordic. Were these supposed to be representative of the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant viewpoint?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think Hanson, you're right, is a very kind of a Lutheran name, we would say, yeah. And matter of fact, the presiding bishop after Bishop Anderson was Bishop Hanson. No relation, not spelled the same. But so yes, Hanson's a very common name, I think mostly out of the Swedish side of our church. Yeah, I think you put it completely. They were kind of the bridge between Leave It to Beaver and the Brady Bunch. They weren't, certainly Mom wasn't with the Pearls, but Mom was a homemaker, but they were parents with wisdom, and that's a key. And they weren't played as fools. And I think that's what the writers were going after.
Mm-hmm. When they were writing the show too, this was back in the day of episodic television. Now these are only 15-minute shorts, but there's a lot of broken continuity. For example, from the first 3 seasons to the 1970s, Davey still has a black friend. It looks like an identical puppet to the one that was used earlier, yet the name has changed. And the same thing with sort of a couple of the other characters, the kid with the eyeglasses, I think his name changed. I forget what the name changes were. Did they simply forget what these characters' names were? Because I would think in the late 60s, they're going, we're going to revive this. But they may not have had instant access to all the character names, and since these characters maybe only appeared every 3rd or 4th episode, they weren't as important as Sally and the parents.
My guess would be it was budget. There was a lot less money the second time around. I don't know what that money was. And so I think it was budget, so that you using the same puppets and things like that.
Oh, okay.
And probably they were more rushed, I'm guessing, when writing, just because of time and money. It was not, there wasn't as much money, it was running out. By the second round, there was less interest in the broadcast networks in showing them. So we were dealing with a whole bunch of, things that were changing at that point. We were lucky to get the second round, I guess, is the honest answer.
So another show that was big in that era that I think there's an unmistakable influence on the Davey and Goliath shorts was the television version of the Our Gang comedies, or the Little Rascals, because there you had these young boys, mostly, with a handful of girls, Darla Hood being the most famous girl there. And they have a club, the He-Man Woman Haters Club, and Darla is the only one that's able to hold her own. And in a similar fashion, there's a handful of episodes where Davey and his friends are building a clubhouse. He's in a gang called the Jickets, although I don't know what the hell Jickets means. But so do you think that there was? How aware do you think were Davey's producers of these things? Because the Little Rascals were big on television in the 60s.
Well, and those guys would have grown up in the Little Rascals.
Yeah.
They would have seen Little Rascals in the movie theater, with So they, yeah, I think it's really, I think it's really, I think the connection is really great there. I got to know a friend of mine who used to work for the Seventh Day Adventist Church named David Smith. His father was one of the Little Rascals, and he had great stories to tell about that time.
Yeah. Um, so when we do get to the later episodes, there are a number, as I said, of outward-looking episodes. The one that sticks in my mind is the one where Davy and his gang go to the quote-unquote inner city where all the poor people live, and the poor people have a rundown park, and Davy and his friends start rebuilding the swing set and the jungle gyms of that era. Um, do you, to what degree if you know, were the writers getting their inspiration from? Was it like, well, we'd like to tell a story about Davy learning this lesson, so let's build the story backwards to get to that end point? Or did you ever speak with the people that were writing and ask them, how they got their ideas?
No, I didn't. However, Dan, again, think of the times. In the late 60s, the Lutheran Church in America about 68, made a major commitment to the urban churches in the Lutheran Church. And so I would think in that sense, they were reflecting what the church at large was interested in. And that it also explains the commitment to civil rights and the urban churches, which was a major emphasis in the Lutheran Church in America.
So let me talk about some of the later specials. How many specials were done in the late '90s or early O's?
In, um, in the late 90s, early '00s, just the one.
And that was the Christmas one.
Davey and Goliath Snowboard Christmas.
But
Right.
there was an Easter special that Tim had mentioned.
Those were in the '70s. Those were earlier.
I
Yeah,
thought,
the one that's still in use that many congregations still use is the First Communion special. But yeah, let's look at I have the timeline here. I pulled it out today. Let's see. Premiered in '61. The first special was '65, Christmas Lost and Found.
okay.
In '67 were three more specials: New Year Promise, Happy Easter, and Halloween Whodunit.
Mhm.
'71 was School Who Needs It. Yep. So those were the specials, and then the last one was the First Communion special. And then, of course, the other piece that I got involved in was all the popular culture references to Davy. In Cheers, in Dead Man Walking, on Friends, on the Simpsons. The animators of the Simpsons, they count Davey and Goliath as one of their inspirations to get started, and they've had Davey on several episodes over the years in The Simpsons. So, but yeah, so it looks like the last production until our 2004 were the episodes from '71 to '73, and then there weren't other episodes until the 2004 episode.
So regarding, I just had a point that just slipped my mind. Let's see here. So let's talk then about the future, because I'd asked him. Everyone uses these words this day, sort of like a franchise. Everything's a franchise. People are franchise, or people want to be brands online. Davy and Goliath is an asset set that the Lutheran Church has. So number one, how was it ever used, perhaps to draw in new congregants? And secondly, if not, what what uh, what is the future for Davey and Goliath? Is it just a symbolic thing now, or because I think Tim had mentioned that people in different countries too had grown up, watching Davey and Goliath.
Um, I Dan, I don't like to go down the rabbit hole of what if, especially in these declining days of denominations. When Tim was on my staff in the late '90s and early 2000s, I had 31 people in communications for the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. Now they have maybe 7 or 8. And this is not just the case in the Lutheran Church. This is all denominations. The national offices have really gotten smaller. So I think, to be honest, there's not likely to be Davey and Goliath produced by the ELCA or people in contract with the ELCA. Plus, you and I have gotten older. The people that grew up on Davey are now 60s, 70s, and 80s. However, what you say is also correct. It's still around. And people in other countries, people in this country are still finding it. So I would wish there'd be some more attention paid to it. I think there's potential still for it. But the real potential was 20 years ago when the boomers were still around, and we tried. I don't regret it, but we tried, and we couldn't kind of, breach the cultural gap to get it back into the conversation. So that's, so I don't think there's a future, but there sure is a glorious past.
I had mentioned to Tim that when I was a kid, the only time I can recall that my church ever said that we needed to watch a specific episode was one of the last episodes produced, the one on Kumbaya, because it was breaking out of just sort of the white world of Lutheranism, and this was an African song that had, I guess, been around for centuries, and the people in my church when I was growing up had thought it was important. Was that one of the more well-received episodes, and what were some of the other, say, 3 or 4 most well-received episodes in terms of not necessarily ratings, but in terms of the effect that it had within the congregations?
Most people remember Happy Easter, I mentioned earlier, because Grandma dies and it's sad, but it's also, and it's still around, and there are congregations that still use it. Many Lutherans remember the First Communion one, and because it was used, I used it for instruction in the 70s and 80s. Those are the two that I think are best known. And then people that have studied Davey are interested in 10 Little Indians and Polka Dot Tie and a few of those because of their uniqueness and backstory.
There was also an episode, speaking of the grandmother, where Davey and his sister visit the grandparents out on their farm, and Davey basically slacks off as he did in some earlier episodes, and I forget whether his locusts coming to destroy everything. And that's also one of the earlier shows that I can recall for any TV show dealing with sort of responsible farming and agriculture and the climate and the green, what we'd call green ideas of things there. But that it seemed to have been incidental in terms of touching those notes. It seemed that the main center was Davey, but yet it did, in the course of its 15 minutes, touch upon some of these things as well.
Yeah. I don't have a good handle on those episodes and their effect because it was way before my time. But I think you're right. I think they tried to respond to issues in church and society in what would now be called liberal ways, open ways, and they're classic because of that.
I know that there were a number of spoofs done about Davey and Goliath where the most famous one probably, the Son of Goliath, which was a play off the Son of Sam, David Berkowitz shootings in the 70s. And then there was also a show called Moral Orel, apparently 15, 20 years ago, in which a puppet boy, I don't know if it was a direct spoof of Davey and Goliath or whatnot. What 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 has been the cultural impact? Have there been any serious adaptations or branchings off from, say, other denominations to have a similar Davy type impact, having cartoon characters or puppets or whatnot?
Um, the two that you mentioned were done without permission, and we protested. But as you know, parody has a wide allowance. But we would never have given permission for the Pet Cemetery one, and the Moral Oral stuff, no. But you still see reference to it now and then. As I said, the seeing it in Dead Man Walking, when she goes into the home and the children are watching it on TV. Those people ask for permission, and which is great. But I haven't seen any other, and I think we're getting a little bit beyond the age of people that remember it from their childhood, and that's sad, but that's reality.
So to close this interview, let me just ask a couple of questions. As someone an outside, I'm these days I'm non-religious, but I recognize the worth of Davey and Goliath and the ethical dilemmas that are presented. But what is the current state of the Lutheran Church, if I can ask? You had mentioned that the denomination is shrinking. Are all of the older denominations like Lutheranism, Calvinism, Presbyterianism, are they shrinking, and are more people going to these sort of mega church type things?
Every religion in the U.S. is shrinking, including the Mormons, for example. Again, I do study this a bit, but I'm not an expert in denominations. But even the mega churches are not what they were 5 years ago. The growth of the nuns, not N-U-N-S, but N-O-N-E-S, is exponential. People identify themselves as no faith. So, the Lutheran Church, Presbyterian Church, Episcopal Church, United Church of Christ, United Methodist Church, they're all shrinking. Now, they're not disappearing, and they're still strong forces in society. And I heard a report recently from the secretary of the ELCA, and she said that the church was shrinking, but Sunday morning worship attendance was up. So, so the people that remain strong and committed financially and morally and with activities. So that's the good thing. I love the Lutheran Church, and I'm committed. It's been my life work, and so we're still there, and I think we'll be there a long time. But it isn't the way it was in the 50s and 60s, even if some of that was very superficial. The denominations are all, they're not as large as they were. The national staffs have shrunk everywhere. The regional staffs for the churches have shrunk everywhere. And it is a changed time, but when isn't? We're always the church is always changing. It's time for another. It was 500 years from the Protestant Reformation, so maybe it's another cycle of Reformation, whatever it'll end up being. But those who tell you that some churches are succeeding and others aren't, while you can point to individual congregations, as a whole, Christianity, Judaism, other major faiths are shrinking in the U.S. That's the reality.
And what is the church's sort of official position? Do you guys have like a plan, a 5-year plan, that how to reawaken Lutheranism or Christianity in general?
Well, remember, I'm not an executive of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. I know the ELCA is in a very active plan to try to attract the new generation, but I'm not the expert on that.
And I know because my church within the Missouri Synod, and that supposedly was a more conservative branch. But in my memory, and this is being a child, I don't remember it as being the Jerry Falwell kind of conservative kind of thing. Uh, do you see? And I'm asking you personally, not as a representative of the Lutherans. Do you personally see that religious belief, and especially Christian beliefs, have to get more ecumenical, more embracing of other things to survive in the long run? Because we've seen it with the Pope, the recently elected Pope. He seems much more liberal-minded than his predecessor, who was still more liberal-minded than some of his direct predecessors.
Yes, the short answer is yes. I am a person who has been very active in ecumenical and interfaith work. In my last congregation in Santa Monica, I had a rabbi on my staff. I think that we are so much more alike than different, and that we need to celebrate what places we are alike and understand the places we are different. When I was in Santa Monica, I got an award from the Mormons for my work in the community. That wouldn't have happened 30 years ago. Yeah. So that things are changing rapidly in a good way with interfaith work and with ecumenical work. Yeah, we need each other. The Lutheran Church, the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, is now in full communion is the word they use, which means we can share pastors among many other things and congregations with the Episcopal Church, United Church of Christ, Reformed Church in America, Moravian Church, United Methodist Church, and have I forgotten others? I probably have. Episcopal, Moravian. Anyway, so we're trying to cooperate in many ways that we can, and because it's important to do, so that if there are little churches in a town or little churches in a city, they can share a pastor and all that. That's all very positive and wonderful, I think, and necessary these days. That's why I'm so hopeful too for the church. And as you probably know, the Christian church is growing by leaps and bounds in Africa. Yeah. The center of Lutheranism is not in Europe or the U.S. It's in Tanzania, Ethiopia, Madagascar. I taught in Madagascar, Dan. They didn't know how many members they had. They were growing so fast. So that's where the church. There's a lot of growth in the Christian church. And it's not only Lutherans that are growing in those countries. It's all the denominations that are there. So that's exciting and something to watch for. And they're going to be the global leaders in Christian churches. They're going to be from Africa in the next years. And that's pretty exciting stuff.
I know you had mentioned when you were talking about the turn of the century special that was done, how different ethnic groups had been brought in, an Islamic girl, a Jewish girl, a Jewish character. Would today, if you were doing that, do you think there would be more focus on, let's say, an episode of Davey encountering an LGBT character? Because I actually saw an article, probably dated about 15 years ago, where someone claimed that would probably be where Davey and Goliath would be going now. And what is the church's official position on LGBT stuff?
Right, and it's one of those things we're very different from the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. The Evangelical Lutheran Church in America is affirming of gay and lesbian people, welcoming. They are children of God. They are no more sinful than anybody else. And we allow pastors in long-term committed relationships, married, same-sex marriages, to be clergy in our church also. That changed in 2009. There were some congregations that left the church over that change. But I think, younger people, they're not arguing over acceptance. Even conservative younger people aren't arguing over acceptance of gay and lesbian people. That's just part of their lives. And we better get on the bandwagon of that, or we really won't exist. Lutheran Church is very strong in commitment to gay and lesbian people, and we have growth there. If we didn't have women pastors, if we didn't have gay pastors, we'd be really short of clergy. We have a clergy shortage now, even though we've been shrinking, but half the seminarians are women or more, and more than half of our regional bishops are now women. So the changes in the church with women and more recently with gay and lesbian people is very dramatic. Lutheran Church Missouri Synod does not ordain women. They do not ordain gay and lesbian people. So that's one of the big differences. That wasn't the case when you were younger because they have gotten more conservative. They are more Jerry Falwell now, I hate to tell you, than they were when you were growing up. And that's sad. I think it's sad.
So, just a final comment then. For someone who hasn't watched or doesn't even know what Davey and Goliath is, can you just sort of give your own personal opinion as why it's something that maybe any parents should get their kids into? You know, even though there's not cell phones, Davey doesn't have a cell phone. He doesn't have whatever. It's 50, 60 years on. But what is its import, do you think, to family life still?
Davey and Goliath was and is a wonderful example of a positive, what I would call real positive family values: acceptance, love, commitment to the community, commitment to the church. And I think modern families, modern children would benefit from it. And it's still watching it. Most of the episodes, as you know, are surprisingly still relevant with the issues that they covered. And so it's fun to watch. Stop motion animation has become, more in recent years, so there's an interest in it on that angle. But just the stories, the morals, the themes, the messages, they're still very current, and you can find most of the episodes on the YouTube, but they're also available on DVD. One of the things we did when we brought Davey back was we repackaged the old ones, so you can find collections of the old ones on DVD for purchase for a very low price. You can probably find them at your library also. So it's fun to give it a watch. At least it'll be fun to watch. At best, it'll have some important messages.
Well, Eric Schaefer, thank you for speaking for about an hour about Davey and Goliath.
You're welcome. It was my privilege.